Sometimes the greatest betrayals come not from strangers, but from the people we trust most. What happened on the Family Feud stage in November 2024 would become one of the most shocking revelations in the show's entire history. Steve Harvey had welcomed thousands of families over his years of hosting, sharing in their joy and occasionally their drama. But nothing could have prepared him for what was about to unfold when the Morrison family from Portland, Oregon stepped onto that stage. A casual laugh, a woman sitting quietly in the studio audience, and a wife who had been carrying a devastating secret would collide in a moment that left 200 people gasping and millions of viewers at home, unable to believe what they were witnessing. Before we dive into this incredible story that will remind you why honesty and loyalty matter in families, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel so you never miss these powerful Family Feud moments that teach us about the consequences of betrayal and the strength of truth. The Morrison family walked onto the Family Feud stage with the kind of energy that producers loved. Leading the group was Brian Morrison, a 45-year-old real estate developer with an infectious laugh and the kind of confidence that filled a room. Next to him stood his wife of 22 years, Catherine Morrison, a composed woman with auburn hair who worked as a high school English teacher. Their 3 children completed the family team. Sarah, their 20-year-old daughter home from college, stood tall and poised. Michael, their 18-year-old son, bounced with nervous energy as a recent high school graduate. And 15-year-old Emma, their youngest, could barely contain her excitement at being on television. Steve Harvey greeted them with his characteristic warmth, asking about their family and making jokes that had Brian laughing heartily. The banter was easy and comfortable, and everyone in the studio could see that the Morrison family had the kind of chemistry that made for great television. What no one could see was the tension that Catherine was holding inside her body, the secret she had been carrying for 3 months, and the reason she had pushed so hard for the family to appear on this particular taping of Family Feud. As the Morrison family took their positions at the podium, Brian waved enthusiastically to the studio audience. His eyes scanned the crowd with the easy confidence of someone who loved being the center of attention. For just a moment, his gaze landed on a woman sitting in the 3rd row. She was an attractive blonde in her mid-30s, dressed professionally in a burgundy blazer. When their eyes met, Brian's smile flickered for just an instant before he turned his attention back to the game. That moment, barely a second long, was noticed by only 2 people in the entire studio. The woman in the audience, whose name was Melissa Turner, and Catherine Morrison, who had been watching her husband very carefully. The game began with typical Family Feud energy. The Morrison family faced off against the Chen family from Sacramento, and the competition started strong. Steve read the first question for the face-off between Brian and the opposing family's captain. The questions came fast, the answers were good, and the Morrison family quickly took an early lead. Brian was in his element, playing to the crowd, making jokes with Steve, and celebrating enthusiastically with each point the family scored. During one particularly successful round, Brian raised his arms in victory and laughed loudly, his voice booming through the studio. In that moment of celebration, he glanced again at the woman in the 3rd row, and this time his smile held something else. Recognition, perhaps. A shared moment of amusement. It was a look that lasted only seconds, but Catherine saw it. She had been watching for it, waiting for it, knowing it would come. To understand the full magnitude of what was about to happen, it is necessary to know the story of Brian and Catherine Morrison. They had met 24 years earlier when both were young professionals starting their careers in Portland. Brian was working in commercial real estate, ambitious and charming with big dreams of building his own development company. Catherine was a first-year teacher at a local high school, passionate about literature and dedicated to helping students discover the power of words and stories. Their courtship had been intense and romantic. Brian swept Catherine off her feet with grand gestures, expensive dates, and constant attention. He was charismatic and confident, the kind of man who could walk into any room and immediately become the most interesting person there. Catherine, more reserved and intellectual, was drawn to his energy and his certainty about their future together. They married after 18 months of dating in a large wedding attended by hundreds of friends, family members, and Brian's extensive network of business contacts. Brian's real estate career took off quickly. He had a natural talent for sales and development, an ability to see potential in properties that others overlook. Within 5 years of their marriage, he had started his own development company, and within 10 years, he had become one of the most successful real estate developers in Portland. The money flowed in, allowing them to buy a beautiful house in an exclusive neighborhood, send their children to private schools, and maintain a lifestyle that looked perfect from the outside. But success had changed Brian in ways that concerned Catherine. As his business grew, so did his ego and his sense of entitlement. He worked long hours and traveled frequently for business deals. He spent money freely on expensive clothes, luxury cars, and country club memberships. He loved being recognized, being important, being the center of attention wherever he went. Catherine, meanwhile, had stayed grounded in her teaching career. She found meaning in her work with students, in the quiet satisfaction of helping young people discover literature and develop their writing skills. She valued substance over flash, authenticity over appearance. As the years passed, the differences between her values and Brian's became more pronounced. The real problems had started about 3 years ago when Catherine began noticing changes in Brian's behavior. He became more secretive about his phone, more defensive when she asked about his day, more distant emotionally even when he was physically present. There were unexplained charges on credit cards, late nights at the office that seemed excessive even by his standards, and a subtle but unmistakable shift in how he related to her and the children. Catherine's instincts told her something was wrong, but she had no proof, and Brian was skilled at deflecting her concerns with charm and reassurance. Then, 3 months ago, everything changed. Catherine received an anonymous email with photographs attached. The images showed Brian with a blonde woman at various locations around Portland, a restaurant, a hotel lobby, walking together through a park. The photographs were dated over the previous 6 months, creating a timeline of an ongoing relationship. The email included no text, no explanation, just the images and their timestamps. Catherine spent a week in shock, looking at the photographs over and over, trying to reconcile the evidence with the man she had been married to for more than 2 decades. She hired a private investigator who confirmed what the photographs suggested. The woman's name was Melissa Turner. She was a 36-year-old marketing consultant who had done work for several of Brian's real estate projects. The relationship had been going on for at least 8 months, possibly longer. The investigator provided Catherine with detailed reports of meetings, hotel stays, and intimate dinners. Brian had been conducting the affair openly in Portland, apparently confident that Catherine would never find out or that his charm and status would protect him if she did. Catherine faced an impossible decision. She could confront Brian immediately, potentially destroying their family and upending the lives of their 3 children. Or she could take time to plan, to prepare, to ensure that when the truth came out, she would be in control of how it happened. Catherine chose the second option. She said nothing to Brian about what she knew. She continued teaching, caring for their children, maintaining the facade of their marriage while quietly consulting with divorce attorneys and financial advisors. She documented everything, building a case that would protect her and the children when the inevitable separation came. But Catherine also made another decision, one that would prove far more dramatic and public than anyone could have anticipated. She submitted their family for consideration to appear on Family Feud, specifically requesting a taping date when she knew Melissa Turner would be in Los Angeles for a business conference. Through careful manipulation and the help of a friend who worked in television production, Catherine ensured that Melissa received complimentary tickets to attend a Family Feud taping on the exact day the Morrison family would be competing. The invitation came through what appeared to be a promotional contest, and Melissa, having no idea of Catherine's involvement, accepted the free tickets and planned to attend the taping as a fun activity during her business trip. The game continued on the Family Feud stage, and the Morrison family was dominating. They had won the main game against the Chen family and were now preparing for fast money, the final round that would determine whether they would win the $20,000 prize. Brian was riding high on adrenaline and success, his confidence at its peak. He kept glancing at the audience during breaks, his eyes repeatedly finding Melissa Turner in the third row. Each time their eyes met, he would smile slightly, a private communication that he believed was invisible to everyone else. But Catherine saw every glance, every smile, every moment of connection between her husband and his mistress. The knowledge sat inside her chest like a stone, heavy and cold. She had planned this moment for weeks, rehearsed what she would say, prepared herself for the consequences. But now that it was actually happening, the reality of it felt overwhelming. Steve Harvey was preparing to start the fast money round. Brian and his son Michael had been selected to play, with Brian going first while Michael was taken backstage so he could not hear the answers. The studio audience was energetic and engaged, excited to see if the Morrison family could achieve the 200 points needed to win the grand prize. Brian Morrison. Steve said with a warm smile, "You ready to do this? You ready to win some money for your family?" Brian laughed his booming laugh and rubbed his hands together enthusiastically. "Steve, I was born ready, let's do this." The audience cheered, and Brian waved to them again, his eyes once more finding Melissa in the crowd. Steve began the fast money questions, and Brian answered each one quickly and confidently. His responses were good, and by the time the buzzer sounded, he had scored 168 points. The audience erupted in applause. If Michael could score just 32 more points, the Morrison family would win $20,000. As Michael was brought back to the stage for his turn, Brian stood with his family, celebrating his strong performance. He was laughing and joking, completely comfortable in the spotlight, enjoying what he believed would be a triumphant family moment. Michael stepped up to the podium, and Steve began asking the same 5 questions. Michael's answers were solid, and with each reveal, the family's total score climbed. By the 4th question, they had already surpassed 200 points. They had won. The studio erupted in celebration, confetti fell from the ceiling, and the Morrison family jumped and hugged and celebrated their victory. But during all the celebration, Catherine remained still and composed. She was not jumping or cheering. She stood quietly, watching her husband celebrate, watching him wave to the audience, watching his eyes find Melissa Turner one more time and share a moment of triumph with her. Steve Harvey, always observant, noticed Catherine's subdued reaction. He approached her with concern evident in his expression. "Catherine, you all just won $20,000. Why do you look like someone just told you bad news?" The question cut through the celebration noise, and the family turned to look at Catherine. Brian's smile was still broad as he walked over to his wife and tried to put his arm around her shoulders. "Come on, honey, we won? Smile!" Catherine stepped away from Brian's embrace, creating physical distance between them. The movement was deliberate and unmistakable, and the celebratory atmosphere on stage began to shift. Steve, sensing something significant was happening, signaled to the production crew to keep the cameras rolling. "Catherine," Steve said gently, "is everything okay?" Catherine looked at Steve, then at her 3 children who were watching with growing concern, then at her husband whose smile was beginning to fade as he recognized that something was very wrong. Finally, she looked out at the studio audience, her eyes finding and locking onto Melissa Turner in the 3rd row. "Everything is not okay, Steve," Catherine said, her voice clear and steady despite the emotion evident in her eyes. "And before my family celebrates this money, I think everyone needs to know the truth about why I brought us here today." The studio fell silent. The Chen family, still standing at their podium, exchanged confused glances. The audience members leaned forward in their seats, sensing drama. Brian's face had gone pale, and his eyes darted between his wife and the audience, specifically to where Melissa Turner sat frozen in her seat. "Catherine, what are you talking about?" Brian said, attempting to maintain his confident demeanor, but his voice betraying his nervousness. "Can we maybe talk about this privately?" "No," Catherine said firmly. "No more private conversations where you lie to me. No more secrets. We are going to talk about this right here, right now, in front of all these people." She turned to address Steve and the audience directly. 3 months ago, I received an email with photographs of my husband with another woman. At first, I could not believe it. We have been married for 22 years. We have 3 beautiful children together. I thought we had built a life based on trust and commitment." Sarah, the oldest daughter, gasped and reached for her younger siblings. Michael and Emma moved close to their sister, the 3 of them holding on to each other as they began to understand what their mother was revealing. "Catherine, please." Brian tried again, but she held up her hand to silence him. "I hired a private investigator," Catherine continued, her voice growing stronger. "I found out that my husband has been having an affair for at least 8 months with a woman named Melissa Turner, a marketing consultant he met through his business. They have been meeting at hotels, restaurants, all over Portland, and Brian has been lying to me and our children every single day for months." The studio audience erupted in shocked gasps and murmurs. Steve Harvey stood speechless, his eyes wide with disbelief at what was unfolding on his stage. Catherine was not finished. She turned to look directly at Melissa Turner, who had half risen from her seat as if preparing to flee. "Stand up, Melissa," Catherine said, her voice carrying across the studio with unmistakable authority. "Everyone should see who you are. The woman who has been sleeping with my husband. The woman who knew he was married with 3 children and did not care." Melissa Turner remained frozen, half standing, half sitting, her face drained of all color. Other audience members near her had turned to stare, some with expressions of shock, others with clear judgment and anger. "You invited her here," Brian said, his voice incredulous as the realization hit him. "You knew she was in the audience this whole time." "Yes," Catherine confirmed. "I wanted her to be here. I wanted her to see our family. I wanted her to look at our children's faces. I wanted her to be present when I exposed exactly what you both have been doing." Catherine turned back to Steve and the cameras. "I brought my family on this show knowing this would happen. I could have confronted Brian privately, filed for divorce quietly, tried to protect our privacy. But I wanted everyone to see what affairs really look like. Not some romantic fantasy, but this. A husband who waves and smiles at his mistress while standing next to his wife and children on national television." The revelation that Brian had been looking at and acknowledging Melissa during the taping sent another wave of shock through the studio. Steve Harvey shook his head in disbelief. "Brian, tell me she is lying," Steve said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "Tell me you were not standing on this stage with your wife and children and making eyes at your mistress in the audience." Brian's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. His face had gone from pale to red, and sweat was visible on his forehead. The confidence and charm that had defined him throughout the taping had completely evaporated, leaving behind a man who looked cornered and desperate. "How could you?" Sarah said, her voice breaking as she looked at her father. "How could you do this to Mom? To us?" The pain in his daughter's voice seemed to break something in Brian. He sank into a chair that a crew member had quickly brought onto the stage, his head in his hands. "I am sorry," he said, his voice muffled. "I am so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen." "You never meant to get caught," Catherine corrected him sharply. "That is different from never meaning to do it. You made a choice every single day for 8 months to betray our marriage. You made a choice to bring that woman into our lives. And you made a choice to smile at her from this stage while standing next to your children." Steve Harvey, who had remained mostly silent during this revelation, finally spoke. His voice was firm but compassionate. "Catherine, I need to ask you something. Why expose this publicly? Why not handle this privately and protect your children from this pain?" Catherine's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained steady. "Because I am tired of women protecting men who betray them. I am tired of affairs being handled quietly while the man's reputation stays intact and the wife suffers in silence. My children deserve to know the truth about their father. They deserve to understand that his actions have consequences. And maybe, just maybe, someone watching this will think twice before cheating on their spouse. Maybe someone will see my children's faces and realize this is what they will do to their own family." The camera panned to show Michael and Emma, both crying, holding on to their sister Sarah, who was trying to comfort them while dealing with her own tears. The image was devastating and powerful, a visceral illustration of the real cost of infidelity. In the audience, Melissa Turner had finally stood fully and was trying to make her way to the exit, but Catherine stopped her with her voice. "Do not leave yet, Melissa. You helped create this situation. You should stay and see the full result of what you have done." Melissa Turner stopped, trapped between the rows of seats and the hundreds of eyes watching her. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "I am sorry. I never wanted to hurt your children, but you did not mind hurting me," Catherine responded. "You knew Brian was married. You knew he had children, but you decided what you wanted was more important than our family." The confrontation between the two women held the studio in absolute silence. Even Steve Harvey seemed uncertain about how to proceed, caught between his role as a host and his human response to the raw emotion unfolding before him. Finally, Catherine released Melissa with a dismissive gesture, and the other woman fled from the studio. The door closing behind her seemed to break the spell, and sound returned to the space as people began murmuring and reacting to what they had just witnessed. What happened after that devastating Family Feud revelation would spark conversations across the country about infidelity, public shaming, and the consequences of betrayal. The episode, when it aired with careful editing to protect the Morrison children's privacy while preserving the essential truth of what had happened, became one of the most watched and discussed episodes in Family Feud history. Catherine Morrison's decision to expose her husband's affair publicly was both praised and condemned. Many people, particularly women who had experienced similar betrayals, applauded her courage and her refusal to protect Brian from the consequences of his choices. Others criticized her for exposing the children to public trauma, arguing that she had prioritized revenge over their well-being. Steve Harvey addressed the controversy directly on his talk show the following week, bringing context and nuance to a situation that many were quick to judge. "I have thought a lot about what happened on that Family Feud stage," Steve said. "Some people think Catherine was wrong to expose the affair publicly, but here is what I saw. I saw a woman who had been lied to for months, who had suffered in silence while gathering proof, and who made a calculated decision to take control of her narrative. She did not react impulsively. She planned it, knowing exactly what the consequences would be. That takes a different kind of strength than suffering quietly." Catherine Morrison filed for divorce within days of the Family Feud taping. The proceedings were complicated by the public nature of the affair's exposure, but Catherine's months of preparation with attorneys and financial advisors put her in a strong position. Brian did not contest the divorce, recognizing that his actions had destroyed any possibility of reconciliation, and that fighting would only prolong the pain for their children. The Morrison children faced the difficult task of processing their father's betrayal in the most public way possible. All three entered therapy, working through complex feelings of anger, betrayal, confusion, and grief. Sarah, the oldest, struggled with trust issues in her own relationships, haunted by the knowledge that her father could deceive her mother so completely for so long. Brian Morrison's life changed dramatically in the aftermath of the exposure. His affair and the public humiliation on Family Feud became widely known in Portland's business community. Several clients and partners quietly distanced themselves from his company, unwilling to be associated with someone whose personal behavior had been so publicly revealed. His reputation as a trustworthy businessman took a significant hit, and deals that had been in progress fell through. Beyond the business consequences, Brian lost the respect of his children in ways that money could never repair. The relationship that had once been easy and warm became strained and formal. The children maintained minimal contact, fulfilling obligations but keeping emotional distance. Brian eventually acknowledged that he needed serious help. He entered intensive therapy to address the narcissism and entitlement that had enabled his affair. He worked to understand how he had rationalized betraying his family and why he had thought bringing Melissa to the Family Feud taping, even as an audience member, was acceptable behavior. Melissa Turner left Portland after the Family Feud incident, unable to escape the notoriety that followed her. The relationship with Brian ended immediately, both recognizing that what had seemed exciting in secret became ugly and shameful when exposed. She relocated to another state and eventually spoke publicly about her role in the affair, expressing genuine remorse for the pain she had helped inflict on Catherine and the children. 6 months after the devastating Family Feud appearance, Catherine agreed to an extended interview with Steve Harvey on his talk show. The transformation in her was remarkable. While the pain of betrayal was still visible, there was also strength, clarity, and a sense of purpose that had emerged from the crisis. "People ask me all the time if I regret exposing Brian publicly," Catherine said during the interview. "The honest answer is complicated. Do I wish my children had not had to experience that moment? Of course, no parent wants their children to hurt. But do I regret taking control of my story instead of letting Brian control the narrative? No, he was going to continue the affair as long as he could get away with it. By exposing it publicly, I ended it on my terms." Steve asked her about the decision to invite Melissa Turner to the taping, whether she thought that was taking things too far. Catherine's response was thoughtful and deliberate. "I wanted Melissa to see us as real people, not some abstract family that existed separately from her relationship with Brian. I wanted her to look at my children and understand that they were real, that the consequences of her choices affected actual human beings. And I wanted Brian to experience what it felt like to have his secret exposed in the most uncomfortable way possible, because that discomfort was a fraction of what I had been feeling for months." The interview included a segment where Sarah, the oldest daughter, joined her mother on stage. Sarah spoke candidly about the impact of watching her family fall apart on television. "It was traumatic," Sarah admitted. "Seeing my dad exposed like that, hearing my mom's pain, knowing millions of people were watching us. But my mom also gave us the truth, and truth matters even when it hurts. I know exactly who my father is now, not some idealized version. And I know my mother is strong enough to choose herself and us over protecting someone who betrayed her." 1 year after the Family Feud incident, Catherine had rebuilt her life with remarkable resilience. She had continued teaching, finding solace and meaning in her work with students. She had become an advocate for women dealing with infidelity, speaking at conferences and support groups about the importance of taking control of your narrative and refusing to suffer in silence to protect someone else's reputation. The divorce settlement had been finalized, providing Catherine and the children with financial security. She had moved into a smaller but comfortable home, creating a space that felt authentically hers rather than a monument to a marriage built on lies. The children were healing at their own pace, each processing the betrayal in different ways. Sarah had returned to college with a new focus on psychology, interested in understanding relationship dynamics and the psychology of betrayal. Michael had graduated high school and started community college, working through his anger at his father through therapy and sports. Emma, the youngest, struggled the most with the loss of the family structure she had known, but was making progress with the help of counseling and her mother's steady support. Brian Morrison had undergone significant personal transformation in the year following the exposure. He had sold his development company and taken a position working for someone else, recognizing that his ego and need for status had contributed to his destructive choices. He attended therapy twice weekly, worked actively on his relationship with his children through family counseling sessions, and spoke at men's groups about accountability and the consequences of infidelity. "I destroyed my family because I thought I deserved to have everything I wanted," Brian said in a published interview. "My success in business made me feel entitled to success in all areas of life, including having a wife at home and a mistress on the side. I never considered the real cost until I saw my children's faces on that Family Feud stage. That image haunts me every day." 3 years after that fateful Family Feud taping, Catherine had become a prominent voice in conversations about infidelity and betrayal. She had written a book titled Refusing to Whisper, Taking Back Your Power After Betrayal, which became a bestseller and helped countless people navigate the aftermath of affairs. In the book, Catherine explored the societal expectation that betrayed spouses should suffer quietly, protecting their partner's reputation while dealing privately with their pain. She challenged this expectation, arguing that public accountability could be a powerful tool for both the betrayed spouse and the community. The book sparked important conversations about the different ways people handle betrayal and whether there was a right way to respond to infidelity. Some relationship experts praised Catherine's approach as empowering, while others worried about the precedent of public shaming. Catherine addressed these concerns directly in interviews and speaking engagements. "I am not advocating that everyone should expose their spouse's affair on television," she explained. "Every situation is different, and people need to make choices that feel right for them. What I am saying is that betrayed spouses should not feel obligated to protect their partner from consequences. If someone chooses to handle things privately, that is valid. But if someone chooses public accountability, that is also valid. The person who deserves protection is the one who was betrayed, not the one who did the betraying." Steve Harvey remained impacted by the Morrison family incident for years. He spoke about it frequently as an example of how television could capture authentic human moments that sparked important conversations. "Catherine Morrison taught me something important that day," Steve said in an interview. "She taught me that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to be complicit in someone else's lies. She could have gone along with the celebration, taken the money, and dealt with things privately. But she chose truth, even knowing how painful it would be. That takes courage." 5 years after the Family Feud revelation, the Morrison family had reached a new equilibrium. Catherine had remarried to a fellow teacher, someone who shared her values and commitment to honesty and integrity. The relationship was built on transparency and mutual respect, with both partners having learned from difficult previous experiences about what truly matters in a partnership. The children had processed their father's betrayal in different ways, but had reached a point of acceptance, if not complete forgiveness. They maintained relationships with Brian, but the dynamic had fundamentally changed. The easy trust of childhood was gone, replaced by something more cautious and conditional. Brian himself had found a measure of redemption through consistent, humble action over years. He never remarried, focusing instead on rebuilding his relationship with his children through patience and reliability. He spoke publicly about his mistakes, not to rehabilitate his image, but to help other men understand the full cost of infidelity before they made similar choices. The broader impact of the Morrison family story extended into popular culture and relationship counseling. The phrase, "pulling a Catherine Morrison," became shorthand for refusing to protect someone from the consequences of their betrayal. Marriage counselors used the case as a discussion point about accountability, public versus private handling of affairs, and the long-term impact of infidelity on children. 10 years after that devastating day on the Family Feud stage, Catherine reflected on the experience in a documentary about infidelity and public shaming. "That moment on Family Feud was both the worst and the most liberating moment of my life," she said. "It was devastating to expose my pain so publicly, to watch my children suffer, to know millions of people were witnessing our family fall apart. But it was also the moment I stopped living Brian's lie and started living my truth. I took control of my narrative instead of letting him control it. I refused to protect him from consequences while suffering silently. And I showed my children, especially my daughters, that you do not have to accept betrayal with grace and silence. You can demand better. You can choose yourself." The documentary included interviews with relationship experts who had studied the Morrison case as an example of how betrayed spouses navigate the aftermath of infidelity. They noted that Catherine's approach, while unconventional and controversial, had ultimately led to faster healing for her because she had not spent years trying to reconcile an unreconcilable situation or protecting someone who did not deserve protection. The Morrison family story serves as a powerful reminder that betrayal has lasting consequences, that lies eventually come to light, and that the choices we make in pursuit of selfish desires can destroy the people we claim to love. But it also demonstrates that victims of betrayal can reclaim their power, can refuse to suffer in silence, and can rebuild their lives with strength and dignity. If this story has impacted you or reminded you of the importance of honesty, integrity, and loyalty in relationships, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more powerful Family Feud moments and inspiring stories of strength, truth, and resilience in the face of betrayal and deception.